Elvis Presley is joined by Nancy Sinatra in tomorrow's film Speedway, which roars into action at 10:55. This afternoon, the music of Pink Floyd is the background for Crystal Voyager, a film by surfer extraordinary George Greenough, who took his camera to the giant tube waves of the Pacific. And that's 2 o'clock for Crystal Voyager here on BBC1. In Pebble Mill at 1, in half an hour, we talk to a new author whose first novel, The Final Run, was recently published. He also happens to be one of Britain's most versatile entertainers, Tommy Steele. Also, Geoffrey Morehouse tells us about the British Raj in India, and music comes from the Dutch Swing College Band. But our news afternoon with Michael Cole and Judith Stamper.
500 relatives of the Falklands dead begin their journey to the South Atlantic. Leaders of the Seamen's Union discuss their next move in the dispute over the troopship HMS Keren. And 47 Russians are expelled from France as French security men crack down against spying.
We hear from the American congressman who is warning British Steel's Ian McGregor that his scheme to buy an American steel plant could come unstuck in the United States Senate. We have the latest on the Australian Royal Tour, and we'll be looking at what the world's new #1 cover girl is doing for Britain's rag trade.
530 widows, children and other relatives of those who were killed in the Falklands War are now on their way to visit their graves. The 2 aircraft taking them on the first leg of the 8,000-mile journey left Heathrow this morning. Neil Bennett watched them go.
For these very special passengers, there were special arrangements. They were checked in at their hotel, and for the children, there were toys, books and crayons to help them pass the long hours. As for the purpose of the visit, one spoke for them all.
I think it's the next hurdle before we pick up the threads of our lives. As you can imagine, the last year hasn't been easy, and I think until we're over this hurdle, it's going to be very difficult to start again.
Don't you think there's a danger that when people actually get to the Falklands and see what a desolate and windswept place it is, they may wonder whether the whole effort and the whole sacrifice was worthwhile?
Well, my understanding is, in fact, it's a very beautiful place. I mean, particularly when the weather's good. I think it's very reminiscent of Scotland. And many people say it really is very lovely, so I hope we'll see it like that.
The VIP terminal at Heathrow Airport has been set aside for the departure of the 2 planes, an area normally reserved for the royal family, senior politicians and visiting heads of state. At 9:10, exactly on schedule, the first plane, a Boeing 747, took off for its 15-hour flight. Most of the 350 people on board said they felt they had to make the journey, but faced it with understandably mixed feelings and emotions.
Details of where the relatives will go in the Falklands haven't all been settled yet, but most have, as Nicholas Witchell reports.
Relatives will be brought first to San Carlos Water, where so many of the men they mourn gained their first experience of these islands. They will step ashore first at Blue Beach, where the British military cemetery is now situated. For weeks there's been careful attention to the cemetery by men from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, preparing it for this visit. Granite headstones now mark the graves of the 14 who are buried here. On each headstone, words chosen by each family. Around the cemetery, a newly constructed wall, bearing stone plaques on which the name of every man lost has been inscribed. It will be a permanent monument. There will be a service of dedication here, attended by all the next of kin. But the afternoon before that, the relatives of the men whose remains actually lie in this cemetery will be able to visit their graves. They will do so in complete privacy. In Stanley, there is much concern. People wonder, how will the relatives react? In appearance, it is not an impressive place, so small and, close to, really rather shabby. The potentially most upsetting eyesore will be removed. The landing ship Sir Tristram, victim with Sir Galahad of the Fitzroy disaster, will be towed out of Stanley Harbour to a position out of sight. Senior military officers believe it's at the personal direction of the Prime Minister, who herself saw the tangled wreck of the campaign's greatest military miscalculation when she came here in January. The few days the relatives spend here will not be easy ones, either for them or for their hosts. The experience will certainly raise questions in some minds and amplify those in others. But though it will not be easy, everyone here knows that the memories these visitors bring are, and will be, infinitely precious.
The government are now looking seriously at plans for a new international airport in the Falklands. It's understood work may start in September. The Defence Ministry say there's been a survey, but no site has been chosen yet. From the Falklands, Nicholas Witchell again.
Nothing is being said officially here in Stanley, but I understand that teams of engineers and surveyors from 3 large British civil engineering companies were brought out to the Falklands early last month to examine the site earmarked for the new airport. It's a flat area of moorland, at present just grazed by sheep, about 16 miles southwest of Stanley, near the community of Fitzroy. It's being suggested that work on the £150 million project may start as soon as September. The benefits of a full-sized strategic airport would be immense, allowing long-range jets, both military and civilian, to come into the islands. Such a facility would supersede the present cumbersome air link to and from Ascension Island by RAF Hercules cargo planes, which are currently being stretched to their limit. So, in the absence of any offers from South American countries to start up an air service, and with the need to be able to reinforce the Falklands garrison rapidly in the event of an emergency, it appears that the government is on the point of agreeing that a brand new multi-million-pound airport for the Falklands is essential.
Senior officials of the Seamen's Union have been discussing this morning what to do about HMS Kerren, the ferry that became a Falklands troop ship. The Royal Navy took it to sea at the weekend after a dispute about pay rates for its civilian crew, and the Union threatened a worldwide strike. From the Union headquarters, John Fryer.
When the Union's senior officers met this morning, no meetings have been arranged with Blue Star, the shipping line managing HMS Kerren, or the Ministry of Defence. But the Union says it remains available for talks at any time. Under Union rules, there has to be a ballot of all the membership before a total strike. But more limited forms of industrial action, including delaying sailings or having bans on overtime, can be called by the leadership without consultation. Well, the NUS remains very angry about what they describe as the naval seizure of the ship. With 27 vessels crewed by merchant seamen in the Falklands area, the dispute has wide implications. But Union sources say that the Cunard Countess, which is due to carry relatives of the war dead to the islands, will definitely not be affected.
And we've just heard that the Union are to meet managers of the ship Blue Star Line this afternoon at ACAS.
The French government is expelling 47 Soviet diplomats and officials. They include a first secretary at the embassy in Paris and the head of the TASS news agency bureau. They are said to have taken part in activities incompatible with their status, a diplomatic phrase for spying. It's the largest expulsion the French have ever made, and it's drawn an angry response from the Russians, as John Starr reports.
The Soviet embassy here has now announced its vigorous protest against what it calls the totally unfounded and arbitrary decision by the French government to expel the 47. And Paris, it says, bears responsibility for the negative consequences on Franco-Soviet relations. The head of the TASS agency, who is among those told to leave, similarly calls it a completely absurd affair, a purely political action. French sources are reported as saying the expulsions follow a series of acts of espionage uncovered over the last months by the French DST intelligence service. One involving the recent arrest of a businessman said to be passing on documents to the Russian embassy. The 47 Russians, according to TASS, are due to leave France this afternoon.
The main steel union, the ISTC, has just made official a strike by 2,500 men who walked out yesterday in protest at compulsory redundancies in South Yorkshire. The men have been picketing this morning to get other workers to join them. John Thorne now reports.
Official ISTC picket line, asking you to cross it.
Steelmen on the first night shift after Easter were wary of the pickets' authority as they arrived at the Stocksbridge works.
Thank you. Official ISTC picket line, lads, asking you not to cross it. It's official picket line, brother, asking you not to cross. No, it's the first you might know about, but we're asking you to support it. It's against redundancies, it's in support of jobs, we're trying to keep jobs in South Yorkshire. Is there our union men here then? I don't know.
We'll see what they say when we get through.
Have a word with them. It's an official picket line. All right.
We'll have a word with him.
Okay. Come back out then, will you? Yeah. All right.
Some of the steelworkers didn't even bother stopping to argue, but the official union man at the picket was relatively pleased at the response.
We haven't been very successful in getting information out up to now. We've had to rely on picketing, but in South Yorkshire as a whole the response is very pleasing, and we're hoping the Stocksbridge lads will be following us.
And what is at the basis of this strike?
Well, we're opposing McGregor's plans on redundancies in all the steelworks of this area. There's over 2,000 people to be made redundant. Men in Rotherham have been sent home compulsorily. We've come out and supported them. This is an official picket line, and we're asking other people to support us against these redundancies.
The plants in South Yorkshire produce specialised steel for the car industry. The union argues that the stoppage will give them the power to negotiate nationally on the issue of some 1,700 redundancies in the area.
The future for steelmen in this Yorkshire Valley is not at risk, hence their reluctance to obey the picket lines this morning before the strike became official. But the opposition in the mill to the idea of enforced redundancies is well known, and the steelmen in Stocksbridge are bound to join any national fight against the McGregor plan.
An American congressman is meeting the steel chairman Ian McGregor for lunch today. He'll warn him that his government will bring in new heavy tariffs if unfinished British steel is sent to the United States. Mr. McGregor wants to get round existing tariff rules on exports to America by buying the Fairless steel plant in Congressman Peter Kostmeyer's Pennsylvania constituency. The unfinished steel slabs would come from Ravenscraig near Motherwell. Mr. Kostmeyer has already met workers there who fear redundancies. Earlier today, I asked him why he opposed the BSC plan.
The steel is produced in Scotland. It will no longer be produced in the United States, and we will lose somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 jobs. I hope that we can strike a compromise in which people at the Ravenscraig plant will not be laid off, and in which people at the Fairless plant in Pennsylvania will not be laid off either.
What sort of compromise have you in mind?
Well, I don't know whether Mr. McGregor will regard it as a compromise, but I want to tell him that if he pursues this, that the U.S. Congress is prepared to impose sanctions by placing high restrictive tariffs on the steel which will be brought in from Britain into the United States. That's basically what we're talking about. If we can work out something in between, we're willing to try to talk about that.
Trade, as you're fond of saying in the United States, is a two-way street. Aren't you afraid that if you bring in those sort of penalties, we'll bring in something similar on this side of the Atlantic?
Yes, but you see, the British steel is subsidized by the British government, and it's almost impossible for American private enterprise to compete effectively with subsidized steel. Every time we lower our wage rates, every time we reduce our environmental standards, every time we increase our productivity and lower the price of the product in the U.S., the British government simply subsidizes the British steel industry, and we're knocked out of the box. So it's really not a fair proposition. So trade is a two-way street, but it also ought to be fair. And that's what we're asking for, is fair trade.
British Steel think there's merit in this plan, and US Steel think there's merit in this plan. Isn't there some real way that this should be pursued, at least during the current recession worldwide, in steel production and steel sales?
I think what we're talking about is, in the United States, forging an alliance with a nationalized industry here. If this industry is privatized, as it may be, and of course we don't know what will happen in your elections here in the next year or so, then we've lost out, because then it will no longer be subsidized and there won't be any advantage in it for U.S. Steel. So I think we have to wait and see what happens. As I say, we're willing to work out some kind of a compromise, but I'm not sure that U.S. Steel ought to negotiate a deal which is based on a nationalized industry here when that industry may no longer be nationalized in the next decade.
The 4 astronauts on board the new American Space Shuttle Challenger are now asleep after a long first working day. Early this morning, they completed the most important task of their mission, launching the world's largest communications satellite. The operation to eject the £60 million satellite from the shuttle's cargo hold passed off successfully. Later today, the satellite will be fixed into a fixed orbit over Brazil.
Police in London have been searching buildings in their hunt for the raiders who took an estimated £5 million from the headquarters of Security Express. Andrew Taylor has been to the scene of the raid in Shoreditch.
Both the police and the company's own security men were busy inside Security Express this morning. Neither were saying anything about their work. But the 6-man gang who forced their way in yesterday spent around 2.5 hours inside the building and apparently had time to celebrate their success with cheap red wine. The theory is that they must have left some clue, and police forensic experts are determined to find it. The company is based on the edge of the city, in an area of offices with hardly any residents. Even the few people who do live here say they knew nothing of the raid until they saw the police cars. Now the police are pinning their hopes to their search of the building and to their knowledge of known armed robbers in the London underworld. Thieves in this country have never got away with this amount of money before. Nobody's saying exactly how much it was, but they're not arguing with predictions that it'll turn out to be around twice as much as the great train robbers are